I don't know about where you live, but where I live, it is starting to feel a lot like the holidays. Yep, we are here. It's cold in Minnesota, and I am coming to a close with season 1. And so this will be my final episode. It won't be the last you'll hear from me, but it'll be my final episode for the year. And what I've got in store for you are just some of my faves going through the rest of December. So you can still hear from me through the end of the year, but our new season 2 of Midlife Crisis to a Centered Life Thriving, will be starting up in January again. So I am feverishly recording some really great guests right now, some in January that are going to talk to us about women's health in midlife. So, I know you're excited about that. But without further ado, I think that you should keep listening today, because what I want to sit and chat and have a little cup of coffee with you about is everything that I learned this year from putting this podcast out into the world, learning that others want to hear this information, how that's inspired me, and what's in store at learntoloveyourstory.com. So keep listening. Welcome. This is Midlife Crisis to a Centered Life Thriving, a podcast that teaches women in midlife to unapologetically stop silencing their dreams and start designing the lives they want to live in. I'm your host, Dr. Natalie, and as a clinical psychologist of the last 2 decades and a twice divorced single mother myself, I not only know how hard it can feel heading into midlife, I am living it right here with you. I have taken all the many failed attempts and lessons learned in my own life and combine it with my extensive clinical experience to give you the tools you need to make midlife the best time in your life. No joke. So let's get started. Welcome back and welcome to our finale for season 1 of Midlife Crisis to a Centered Life Thriving. It has been such a joy to sit here with you weekly, putting out material that I know that the version of me about 5 years ago really needed to hear. And on my journey of healing and on my journey as a psychologist during that time, I really started to put together this whole big thing I call Learn to Love Your Story on learntoloveyourstory.com, because I just knew I couldn't be alone in this, right? Like the wheels had come off of my train. And I've talked about that throughout this year. And hopefully my sharing my story helps you feel like you're being heard, like you're being seen, and like you're being understood. Because I just knew, having had experience sitting across the couch for thousands of hours from lots of people, that I knew it wasn't just a lone experience. Of course, mine was unique to me and yours is unique to you. But what isn't unique is that it just seems like somewhere in that 35 to 65 year age range, sometimes all at once with a big life event, and sometimes in incremental steps across that 30-year span, women really, I think, step into their power by the time they get into the later life. And if I could help accelerate that for even one person, that meant something to me. And that was really what spurred me to do this podcast. If you haven't heard my very, very first podcast, I will be releasing that during December too. Little spoiler alert. But I want you to listen to that again. I want you to listen to what it was that inspired me to do this. And I want you to think about like, oh, okay, I got it. Like she wanted to bring this out here because she's been there like us. She's been in the trenches. And, for me, it was a series of unfortunate events that kind of culminated about 5 years ago in my second divorce. And for you, it might be smaller stuff. It might be that wrinkles are setting in. It might be that perimenopause has joined you. And so as your hormone levels go down and your symptoms go up and the weight packs on, you just don't feel yourself anymore. That certainly is a journey for many of us. But what I think that we can find on the other side, what I'm hoping that this next season especially will help you with, as I invite more guests on and more guests that have specific messages just for you. I want to help women in this age range really figure out for themselves who they are and living the life that they want to live. Not a life that you've been taught is the right life for you, but the life that you're choosing for yourself. I really think choice was taken out of it. And that, for me, is really what inspired me to do all of this. To me, it doesn't really matter if it's one major event like a midlife crisis, if it's a series of events like going through perimenopause or having your kids age out of your house or your career drifting or social currency for beauty falling down the wayside. There is just a change that's coming for all of us women in this middle age range. And it comes sometimes, like I said, as a trickle and sometimes as a big wham. It really doesn't matter how it gets there in your life. It will shift your life. And I want you to have the tools that you need to make a choice to have the life you want around you in those, moments as you transition. I don't want it to be a life that feels hard, that feels like a slog. I don't want you to be a human doer or, feel like your worthiness comes from your output in the world, how well you caretake, how well you do your job. I want you just to feel like life is this beautiful thing that we get to live and that you enjoy living it. And I want you to be discovering that with me. And I want to be able to bring to you the tools that you need for that journey. So that's why I started this. I feel like, hey, a year in review, I think we did pretty well. I think that we talked about a lot of these topics. We talked about things like, why is it that women that are really smart seem to have problems in dating? Don't remember that podcast? I'll link it in the notes so that you can go back, because there's a real reality to that. We talked about what's it like when your kids age out and switching from that transactional relationship into a more relational relationship, like loving the human and standing with them as their biggest fan, but not doing for them anymore, because that's not your journey in parenting when they become young adults and adults in your life. Like what are these tools, Dr. Natalie? What are they? Why don't I feel like I have them? Well, the short answer to that, I always will tell you, is go to my website, learntoloveyourstory.com. I have courses on 5 different subject areas that I have seen us, circle around during life transitions for the last 2 decades that I've worked and as a psychologist helping other people. So those are things that I talk about every week, but just as a reminder, self-awareness, self-compassion, making self-empowered decisions for yourself, which means kind of letting go of some of the programming and conditioning of our lives, incorporating self-care in a whole radical new way, which is that you come first before everything else, that it actually makes you a better giver in the world if you are first the receiver of your biggest care and benefit. And then finally, kind of evolving into this growth mindset, right? So that we're always a dynamic being and growing, and nothing is set in stone, and we don't arrive at this magical place where we've got it all together. We're just constantly growing through our life. And it's those 5 skill sets that I'm referring to here. And I incorporate them and I layer them in and I talk about them in my various podcasts. And so you'll hear about that, but they are courses that I have online. And I will be doing another group coaching cohort in the new year. So if that is something that you're interested in, there will be a place for you to click in the notes to the podcast, wherever you get this podcast. And I would strongly encourage you to click on that link and see, what information you can gather. Part of it is you get to meet with me in person. Yep. I like to do a little consult with you first of all, so that I can see if this will be a good fit for you or what would be the best fit for you. Because I certainly don't want you just joining a program if it's not something that's going to work for you. Right. So, that's my short answer to what are these skill sets. Let me give you in my, synopsis of what I think went well for me this year, what I think, how I think these skill sets actually work in action. Like one of the things that's super important to me about this podcast is that you understand that I know what it feels like to be in flux, to feel like life, that the rug got pulled out from underneath you. I don't have all my stuff together. I do know the science. I do. I have done that research. I do teach on that, both to you and I teach students and I teach clients, all of those things. But do I have it all together? Oh, no. So these are things, this is what I mean by that growth mindset, which is kind of that final stage of my coaching program. I want you to evolve to a place where you're using these skills and kind of recycling them in and through your life at all times. But hey, what better way to share with you how these skills work, why I think that I did a fine job through this first season of this podcast, sharing this with you in my various podcasts. I'm going to share a story with you. That's the best way. I always think that it just is more meaningful if you hear it through a storyline. So let's talk about what Dr. Natalie learned this year. I'm just so grateful that you are a loyal listener and that what I'm delivering here is something that you want to be listening to each and every week. There are just other ways that you can be working with me through learntoloveyourstory.com, and I want to make sure that you know what those are. Now, for starters, all of these are links that you would find in the notes for every single podcast. And if you found me in a post on learntoloveyourstory.com, all of these links are there as well. But there are 3 ways that you can work with me. The first, and the one that I really strongly recommend, is join my Facebook group, join my community. This is a place where we can all talk with one another about what you're hearing me put out on podcasts, write in my blogs, and you really get some support, some community around making change, working towards that centered life thriving that you want. The second thing is I have a whole set of courses online, all there, right there for you, that will teach you and walk you through with workbooks, with guided meditations. So if you haven't seen that, you should at least go over and browse. And then my last and my favorite way is to meet with you one-on-one. I do a free consultation for an entire hour. It's called a midlife valuation. And that's what we're going to do. We're going to look at the value of your midlife. We're going to compare that to the goals that you have for yourself. And we're going to help you come up with a plan where there's gaps there. And it's all free to you. So these are the 3 ways to get started working with me in another way if you're loving what you're hearing on the podcast. So for me, one of the things that I was on in this journey this year was a real transition in my work, which for me is huge, honestly. I know I've spoken to the point, kind of tongue in cheek, that I like to overwork, that's kind of my drug of choice. When life is hard, then I just double down and I do more work and I throw more time and energy towards that aspect of my life. Wow, I'm doing a lot of ums today. So sorry. I'm not editing all that stuff out. So you're just going to have to hear that during the podcast. But this is just a conversation. So I'm kind of talking as I'm thinking. And what I know to be true is I had stopped with my medical insurance part of my private practice, which drastically reduced the amount of people that I was seeing for therapy during the course of this year. I upped some of the teaching gigs I was doing, some of the speaking gigs I was doing, kind of to compensate for that economically. But it was a different feel for me. I mean, I used to have pretty much about 30 to 40 people that I was seeing per week. And that would be including like my one-on-one student sessions, my sessions with clinical supervisees. So it's not all with clients that I was doing therapy for, but probably around 25 to 30 were client hours. And that was kind of my usual for the last decade or so in outpatient therapy of various kinds. I was in a community health clinic for a while. I was in group practice for a while, in my own private practice. That's kind of how I spun it. And to reduce those hours was an uncomfortable change for me. And what I noticed came up with my self-awareness skills, right? What I was noticing for myself that was coming up is a lot of anxiety. Now, of course, that was layered in with perimenopause, because as a 47, I'm 47 now. As a 47-year-old during most of this last year, I also am noticing a lot of fluctuations in my mood with my hormonal changes, which is an unfortunate thing. And we are going to have a guest on at the beginning of the year that's going to talk about women's health issues. And I'm hoping she might give us some insights about hormone replacement therapy for women in this perimenopausal stage. So you aren't losing periods yet. What you're losing is hormones, estrogen and progesterone and testosterone. And as those come down in this stage of life, because we don't have to give birth anymore, that we're not procreating at this age, this is what we will lose through this process. But as those hormones go down, a lot of symptoms come up. And there was a study, I think it was the late 80s, early 90s, that was really misleading about how hormonal replacement therapy causes things like cancer is highly correlated. It's not causative. Even the study couldn't say it was causative. But, once pop culture gets a hold of something, that's how it sounded. So a lot of us kind of are fearful of using hormonal replacement therapy. I'm hoping that she'll be able to help us with that a little bit, just to give us some ideas about what adaptogens might be useful to us at this stage. But at any rate, anxiety and mood disruption is happening for me, I think, physically, just as my hormones are changing over time. That's an unfortunate parallel that happened at this same time where I was deciding to kind of put aside parts of my practice. And, that anxiety drives old programming. That's what happens, right? Like my mind doesn't know how to fix that problem without overworking, essentially. And I'm watching this happen. But what's different about my watching it happen over the course of this past year was my compassionate lens with that self-awareness. So I always put those two together. They are fully 2 courses in my online courses, and they are fully, 4 weeks of self-awareness and 4 weeks of self-compassion if you do my group coaching with me for the course of a 20-week program. Yes, it is a 20-week program. I tried it 10 weeks. I promise you want to do it with me for 20 weeks if you really want to put these things into play in your life. That's just the reality of it. Is a 20-week course, honestly, is just scratching the surface. But I want to hold your hand for that very long period of time, so that for, making sure that I really help you get those skill sets in hand. And there are lots of women, you can see some of the testimonials on my website. There are lots of women that have really appreciated how detail oriented that program can be. So at any rate, I've been more compassionate as I've noticed my anxiety about this. I've been more aware that it's a program, like it's an old conditioning from my family of origin, but some just from American culture. Like, you should be making more money. You should, your hustle is your worthiness. So if you're not hustling, if you're not working very much, there's something wrong here. You're doing something wrong. And I have had to journey with that over the course of this last year, and still am. I am nowhere near through the discomfort of that, but I'm on I think the downward slide of I'm hoping the downward slide of the discomfort of that, because this year was really uncomfortable. But I did a few things for myself, including going on a 5-6 week excursion with my young one as we camped and did stuff across the summer. And I did some interviews and had supplemented the podcast. But then I found that I really like interviews. So that will definitely be an incorporated part through the rest of the podcast, as you'll see in season 2. Less talking head. Sorry, ladies. But I will still have these. I'll still sit down with my cup of coffee and I'll still have some intimate conversations with you. But all to say, I think I'm on the downward slide in how the discomfort of my anxiety, but I still have anxiety about this adjustment. But the adjustment really was that what I realized is that for me was a strong, and I don't use this word lightly, I'm a trauma therapist, but that was a strong trauma response for me. It had adaptively got me through really difficult times in my life when I needed to just buckle down and have something to be focusing on and working on. But what's happening in this later stage in my life is it's not serving me. It's coming at an expense to my physical health, to my relationships, because I don't have as much time to spend with my kids and things like that. So I really, had a heart to heart with myself and realized time is more valuable to me than money. That money is something I can always make and will continue to make. And I also kind of have a different idea of that. Like, I never saw my parents retire. They died in their early 60s. And so I really kind of want to design my life to be able to work enough to afford my life. And I don't see myself like retiring and not working at all, but I do see myself sunsetting how much I work through these later stages in my life, not anytime soon. But so for me, I wanted more time now. It's like I want to borrow this idea of like, at 65, you will retire and you'll have all this time. I want to borrow from that time and I want to put it right in the middle of my, late 40s and 50s. I want that time so that on a Wednesday afternoon, if I don't have anybody scheduled and I don't have to put out a new podcast and I could choose to, spend the afternoon walking, reading, watching a documentary, which are fun things for me, that I'll do that. That's literally what I'm trying to design for myself right now. But you guys, this journey has been so uncomfortable for me. It really has, because that trauma response of working and overworking equals you're doing better and you're healing is a hard program to overwrite for me. And that's what I'm in the middle of it. So there's still discomfort and there's still anxiety, and that's still mixed with my hormonal changes, which is no fun. But I have compassionate self-awareness of all of that. Right. And in that compassionate self-awareness is just enough distance from it that I'm not so in it that I can't see that there's a bigger picture here and see the back of my hands. Right. Like I now, with compassionate self-awareness, I can push myself back and say, but this is what you want, Natalie, because in the grand scheme of things, you don't want to be burned out at 55. And that is coming sooner than you think if you keep on this journey, because this body is not going to be able to keep up with that. When you're 55, that's another, 8 years away, I know, but you'll have a 16-year-old at home. And we all know, like, that's when the kids are moving from that transactional parenting need to a relational parenting need and becoming kind of their own people as they're learning how to do things, because they're going to be out of your house sooner than later, right? And I don't want to be there trying to make this stuff happen, being this uncomfortable. So I'm doing it at the right time. And I'm really proud of myself for that. And I'm really grateful to this, chat that we have once a week that has allowed me to use my own stuff and share that with you along the journey. So that's where I'm at. Like, I've made this empowered decision. I'm trying to overwrite that programming and conditioning. Now, how do I do that? Right? Like, you're baffled at this idea that I have the skill for compassionate self-awareness, but there's something else there. And I know what it is, because I've watched many, many women in my group coaching programs kind of struggle with this little interface. They get the idea of what I'm talking about. They understand the concepts. They even buy into them, like they'd like to apply them. But that piece about the discomfort, right? That piece about, oh my gosh, this is going to be a lot of effort for me to like literally rewrite my story. What? Like, I don't have that. I don't have that capacity in me anymore. This is why I teach self-care at that juncture. I wait until you've kind of grasped it and have an idea of, oh, I really want this for myself. I do. I really want this for myself. And I don't see myself having that capacity. And that's where I want to introduce a new idea of what self-care really is. I want you to throw away Cosmo, Allure magazine, Vogue, all of those ideas. I want you to throw them away. I want you to throw away all the pop culture ideas of, I just need to get some more yoga in, maybe better exercise and nutrition. Very important. Yes, indeed. But the idea that I'm hustling over here in my self-care is not the kind of self-care that I'm talking about, right? What I want you to grasp here is that self-care is really your care of all the things that you do in your life. So it's your care of others. And I know I am a woman and I'm midlife. So I know we've been acculturated to be the caretakers of all the people. We have our hands in all the pots. And I am not going to even pretend to talk you out of wanting to do that, because that is what you've designed your life around up until this point. Now, some of us diverge from that considerably. Many of us don't, though. Many of us, even in our self-empowered decisions, are trying to empower ourselves to do the kind of caring that we want to do and not the kind of caring that we're told we have to do. So we're trying to kind of like cut out the yeses to things that we don't want to say yes to anymore so that we preserve the yeses to the things we do want to say yes to, right? I know this about you. So I am not talking about self-care as an indulgence or an escape from your life or a way of coping with your life. I am talking about the radical idea that when you're caring for yourself first, you're preserving the vessel, the tool, the mechanism by which you're doing all of these other things out in the world. And so if you shift this idea into the way that I help my kids best is when I help myself first. The way that I help my work best is when I make sure that I have that capacity, that I've been taking care of myself. The way that I, take care of these relationship issues that I'm noticing later in my life, and the way I resolve that is that I come back to taking care of me. But you have to figure out what taking care of you looks like. And here's the thing. If you are like myself and you didn't start this until your 40s, you don't have a good idea of what actually gets you to want to stay inside your life, stress and all, right? You don't have a good idea of what the kind of care that you need is that helps you to want to be inside the discomfort of making these changes. And that's the kind of self-care that you need. And that particular journey, I don't do until you've had at least 15 weeks of time with me, where you've really gotten the gist of all of these other concepts, because then you can really appreciate with me what kind of radical shift I'm trying to do. It isn't oh, yeah, Dr. Natalie, I'll do self-care. Let me just add a couple things on my calendar. It's that is the first step in doing all of the things that I do in my life. And so it has more value than even all of those things do, except that this is how it works. It's like exponentially, if you put into you, then exponentially you're able to put out into all of those things. You really have to be able to grasp that to want to do the hard work of figuring out what makes you want to stay in your life. And for me, one of the things I learned is that's time for me, which makes me feel extremely uncomfortable. Because if I take an afternoon off and watch a documentary and read a book and take a walk, I probably spend hours in my head fighting off the idea that that's a bad thing. That's indulgent. I shouldn't be doing that. What's happening to the finances? I'm not going to be able to afford this. I'm constantly with my compassionate self-awareness, taking care of that voice, that inner mean girl in my head and saying, I hear you, I see you. You only have one way you know how to fix this, and that's through work. But I'm not letting you take this anymore. It's not your job. It shouldn't have been your job. You shouldn't have been pushed to that limit and down to the bone. So I know you're really upset with me because you're scared that I am not going to fix this with the way that I'm approaching this. But I'm just telling you, we're just going to build trust in one another. You know, this mean girl part of me and this new part of me who's uncomfortable taking care of herself, we're just going to build trust in one another that if I learn that this new way isn't working, that I'll course adjust then. But we're going to learn something new. We're on a growth edge. We're fixing this with ways of doing things that we've never seen, never felt, never heard before. We're going to try new things, and it's going to be uncomfortable, and it's going to be okay. And it's that level of self-care over and over, you know, repeatedly having those internal dialogues with yourself that really start to course correct what years of programming and conditioning have, you know, set you on the course of. And it does get easier. The effort is big in the beginning, but it actually isn't. These conversations, as I talk to you about them, aren't as effortful as they once were. Sometimes they irritate me when my tolerance isn't really high, when I'm tired, when I'm hungry, when I'm something, right? Then, you know, sometimes they interfere. But most of the time, I'm ready for them. And I'm having that internal dialogue, and I'm thinking to myself, you know, part of what made me so scared and made me want to like double down and overwork all the time was that I didn't think that anybody had my back. I didn't think that, you know, I'd had lived experiences of people not having my back. Let me say it that way. And I know you have too. I know you have, where, you know, the chips were down and there literally was nowhere to go with that. And I had to figure it out. Right. And those times of figuring it out, while they were growth edges, they were really scary, and they were really lonely, and they were really, hard. They were just hard. Right. And nobody wants to go back to that, but this is different. And so the effort feels effortful in the beginning because you have to get over that hump of it's not going to be like that. What it's going to be like is you have your back. You always have your back, and you're not going anywhere, and you're not going to make you do things that don't feel great for you anymore. You're designing a life you want to be living in. You're not designing a life you don't want to be in, right? And so over time, while there still has to be dialogue, and I'm still talking the mean girl off the ledge, I'm doing it with a newer lived experience that I've got my back, that these are the conversations happening because I'm not going to let her be out there alone thinking she has to fix things in my life anymore. I don't think her way works. And instead of letting her hijack me and feel all alone out there, working her ass off, trying to help me out, I'm going to actually have her back and say, you don't have to do that. You know, I got this. Like, we're going to try some new things and feel uncomfortable. Yes. And if that doesn't work, we'll keep moving forward, but I'm never leaving. I've got your back. And that's the second component in the self-care. That's really kind of the secret sauce, I would say, right? But all of this, you know, as you're listening to me today, I hope it's resonating. I hope you're understanding. I really feel like the course of this year, I've been able to kind of share this journey with you in different ways, and talking about past, you know, experiences that I've had where I've learned those lessons. In sharing, you know, guests that have had those lessons. But what I find to be so interesting is that it's really about, you know, coming to a place where you have a relationship with yourself, where you're loving on yourself. I also talked about that, I think, around the Valentine's holiday. So I'll try to link that podcast in the notes as well. Because that was one of my faves. Like, I think, you know, we need to take ourselves on dates. We need to build a relationship with ourselves. We need to be talking to ourselves. We need to be a best friend to ourselves, and a best friend in a way where you're like telling yourself the hard thing that nobody else wants to tell you, and sitting with you through growing through that hard thing, not the kind of best friend that just tells you what you want to hear. That's not a best friend. That's, that's circumstantial. That's not superficial. It's not somebody that's going to be with you there through thick and thin. And that's really what I'm trying to help you build in your version of self-care. The way to stay in your life is to know that you always have your back and that you're not going anywhere. And that, no matter how scary and anxiety provoking a new growth area is, that it isn't a growth area that you can't manage because you always are going to have your back. And it's that premise that I just want to keep installing and instilling in all of you with these podcasts. So that's been my journey up until this point with you. And I really think that many of the podcasts I put out this year, I think there's, over 40 of them now. So that's a pretty good season, ladies. And I would encourage you, over the next month, go back and revisit the ones that you liked the most. Go look at the ones that got listened to the most and re-listen to those ones and figure out why is it that one seemed to be resonate for so many people. Like I've got hundreds of downloads on some of them and just a handful on other ones. And so, go back and look at that wherever you get your podcasts, and that will help kind of guide you on re-listening to some of these. And any of those areas in those first 4 skill sets, self-awareness, self-compassion, empowered decisions, or breaking the programming and conditioning in your life, and self-care that, might boost you a little bit, because I went through all of that stuff this year. And then growth mindset is just kind of like the evolutionary process of using those 4 skills over and over and over. And it's having this new mindset that we were never supposed to arrive at the perfect life. We were never supposed to be static in one space. So there might have been moments in time where we really loved our lives, when our careers were just stellar and hitting it, and we were doing the best that we, ever thought we could. Or, when we were in the midst of raising kids, and maybe we were dripping with kids in a Target, line or something like that on the way out buying groceries. But we also were like looking around and seeing how cute they were and enjoying, watching them learn things and grow and all of the stuff. Like there may have been moments in our life where we really enjoyed those moments or those periods of time, but we were never arrived at those times, like at a perfect place. We're a dynamic, changing being. That is what humanity is. And we will, until the moment we take the very last breath on this earth, continue to do that kind of dynamic changing. So growth mindset is just owning that. It's owning that you've never arrived. There is no arrival. It's always a process. And there's a way to really be enjoying being the best version of yourself today that you can be, based on everything you've learned so far. And still be striving for excellence, and still be striving for, and I can continue to grow. And as I continue to grow, I'll continue to be a better version of myself going into the future. That's really what the growth mindset is. And the way that you get that growth mindset to go in your life is by using those other 4 skill sets. And this is what I know to be true just from my lived experience as a psychologist, my lived experience as a human, as a woman in midlife. And I want to share that with you, and I will continue to share that with you because you followed me all this year. And thank you so very much for that. I cannot tell you what a joy it is to know that people are actually using this. And even if it's just a small population, like I said in the very beginning of this podcast, even if it's just one person that I help, that to me is worth it. All these hours, throwing this out there, because man, had I stumbled onto a podcast like this 5 years ago, it would have been a godsend. And I had some godsends. I had some, golden ropes that I was hanging on to that helped me to come to where I am right now. And I so appreciate and I'm so grateful for all of those. And I'm still growing, and I want to make sure that I leave the world a little bit better place. So what I've learned is what you're learning. What I've learned is what I'm putting out into the world for this podcast. I hope you enjoyed season 1. It started as, I think, straight from the psychologist's mouth, and then it merged to Midlife Crisis, to a centered life thriving with Dr. Natalie. And I hope that, it's given you what you needed in 2023 and that you'll continue to join me in 2024 when I put out season 2 of the podcast. Thank you all so very much. Keep learning to love your story so that you can have that centered life thriving, so that you can design the life that you want to be living in. Are you liking what you're hearing today in this podcast episode? Oh, I am so glad. I love being able to really touch people in a place where they need the help, right? So I have 2 requests of you. The first one, could you just think of one person in your life that also could hear this message? I bet you could. And what I'd ask you to do is when you're done listening today, why don't you just take the link and send it to that person, right? Let them have a chance to also gain from this the way that you are today. And then the second thing that I would request that you do is make sure that you're following me where you get your podcasts. Like, comment. I even on Spotify have questions each and every week. Use any of those outlets because it does help me help you. What I gather from that information is what you want to hear about. And then I make sure that these podcasts are relevant to what your needs are. All right. So I'm adding a little addition here. It's the legal stuff. Just so you're aware, nothing in any of these podcasts constitutes actual psychotherapy. Yes, I am a licensed clinical psychologist in the state of Minnesota, but everything here is just educational in nature and is a suggestion of things that you could be doing in your own life to learn how to love the life that you're in instead of waiting for a life that you're dreaming of to come towards you. So just remember, this is not therapy. And if ever you need any resources for mental health, look in my notes and I'll always have a little blurb at the bottom where you can click on a link and get those services for yourself.